Hi, how's it going? This is David, your writing fellow. I am sorry that I'm getting this back to you so late. I saw your message early Sunday morning, and so I tried to get to it as early as possible, and so I'm getting to it at 12:26 a.m. on Monday morning. So hopefully you have enough time to rewrite a few things. I loved your ideas. I thought that they were excellent, and so I'm seeing this on turnitin.com. I eventually found it. Um, and uh, and so let's go through. I'm just going to explain a few of my messages. I find that that's more helpful than just writing it down. So right here in this first paragraph, I thought that it was a great introduction into your ideas. So for a first paragraph, you should always include why it's important. So why is the subject important that you're going to talk about? And so I thought you gave a great introduction into SARTs, no exit. Um, One thing that it was hard for me to find was a clear cut claim, a thesis statement that makes a claim of what you're arguing. I think that what you're arguing is um, that the subjects um, submit themselves to each other's gaze, and that proves to be far worse than any physical pain that they could have been inflicted. That the torture was not something that they themselves were experiencing from somebody else, but it was basically from the gaze of each other, that they were torturing each other, and that was their torture. But it seems more of uh, what should I say, a summary rather than a claim. And so one thing that I would encourage you to do is try to write out a thesis that makes this main claim. And according to Harvard Writing Center, a thesis statement should make a claim of what you are arguing and then how you're going to argue it. So what I mean by that is that you say, okay, Sartre's characters endure what can only be described as mental anguish, rather be due to each other's gazes, rather than, which proves to be far worse than any physical pain that could have been inflicted. And then you go through and you describe, this is done because of this and this and this. And so you mention that within that thesis statement, you just give a brief overview of what you're going to argue. You don't have to write it very long. It could be a short little blip of about how you're going to argue it throughout the paper. That way the person knows. And with each paragraph, it should be something that always links back to your thesis statement. So I love the way that you summarize this next idea in Sartre's No Exit. However, my question would be, how does this example relate to your overall argument? So in other words, how does this point back to the punishment that they receive, or to your thesis statement that you mentioned earlier? And how does this further your argument? So you did a good job of summarizing that, but then how does this further your argument? I would just add a few sentences mentioning that, or it could be even one sentence that summarizes your idea and mentions how it connects to your thesis statement and how it furthers your argument. Also, whenever you mention something like to avoid the mental torment they brought upon themselves by being each other's looking glass, what do you mean by a looking glass? So some people might interpret that in many different ways. And as my program director always tells us, that when you're writing an argumentative paper, or when you're writing a paper in general, you want to leave no room for interpretation for the reader. You want the reader to know exactly what you mean. And so for me, when I think of a looking glass, it might be different than somebody else when they think of a looking glass. So that's something that I would encourage you to explain. What do you mean by that whole sentence? Meaning, like, bringing mental torment that they brought upon themselves by being each other's looking glass. Hopefully this is making sense. I'm sorry because it's late at night and I babble, but hopefully this is helpful. Also, lastly, this last sentence, how does this relate to the thesis statement and why? So always link back your examples, your paragraph, to the thesis statement. I didn't make any comments on this last paragraph, but that's because it has the same lack of focus as the rest of the paragraph. So always pointing back to that thesis statement. And then lastly, I really thought that this was a good paragraph. I thought you explained the point that you're trying to get at. However, this is more of an addition to your argument rather than a concluding paragraph. So a concluding paragraph should restate your thesis statement and then give a brief summary of how you argued it throughout the paper. So you could just mention your thesis with a difference, changing the thesis wording a little bit, but then saying how you argued it throughout the paper and why that's important again, how that all ties into one another. And so I really think that your paper has great ideas. It could use some work on the focus, and that is what I am focusing on for this revision here. I know that you might not have time to revise it right now, but I would encourage you to revise it anyway, even if you don't have time before class. And the reason why that is because the more you practice, the better it will be for the later papers. And so also you can go back and look at this video and see any ideas that I give you and try to implement them for future papers. It was a pleasure reading your paper, and I hope to hear from you again and see you in class.